Okay, good evening. So my name is Chip Berger. I'm the project manager for the Transit Master Plan for Newton County. And with me is Robert Greer. He was instrumental on working on the project as well. And also Tony and Chester were our colleagues with the county and helped us so much. So it was a great experience. And so we appreciate you sort of breaking us out from being a lowly agenda item to having our own work session with you. That's very nice, and we look forward to spending some time with you. So we'll get started here. So here's today's agenda. My plan for the presentation is to hit the highlights of the first, say, half-ish of the slides, because I think like most boards, you want to know what am I going to get and what am I going to pay for it. So that's more towards the back. But since this is a work session, if you have questions or want to talk about an item, just feel free to stop me, and we'll spend some time on it. But that's sort of the plan. And this is the agenda and basically the flow of the project. And so we'll go through each element up here throughout the presentation. We had some help on the plan. We had 3 disadvantaged business enterprise subs. We had a pretty strong goal of 25% DB participation, which means they got that much of the fee, and that was Blue Cypress, Kinetics Transportation Group, and Foursquare. So they helped us out with different elements of the study. So, why did we conduct this study? Newton County is one of the few, 32 counties that doesn't have transit within the state, and you have the 3rd highest population. So it was something that came out of the 2018 County Transportation Plan to take a look at transit and to do a feasibility study to see if it made sense for the county. And so what this plan will do, it'll assess the need and demand for transit, and then to give you some recommendations for your consideration as far as services and what they would cost. So key elements of the plan, and it was sort of like our agenda. Initially, we always look at the existing conditions, what's going on in the county at this time, or any study area. And then we look at the transit needs in the market that might be there for transit. And then we come up with potential services and then the funding. And then we put together the master plan. So throughout the study process, we had those ongoing activities. So throughout the process, we had stakeholder and public outreach activities, and some of y'all probably participated in the study advisory surveys and stakeholder surveys. And then we also, throughout the study, had project management activities ongoing. So we had 3 in-person public outreach meetings. And actually the one on May 2021 was my first meeting in person in over a year and a half, just about. We met outside, and it was really nice to feel like COVID was starting to get over with. So we had 3 of them, 2 at the Turner Lake Ballroom, and then that first one was at Legion Field. We also did online public surveys, and you can see up there for each one, we had excellent participation from the public. Over 800 surveys completed on 2 of the surveys, and one had over 1,100 surveys returned. So we thought that was very good. And then our technical advisory committee, we met with them as well, and that was made up of key local stakeholders and planning partners. We had other outreach activities. We did have a project website, and at the end of the project, all project documents will be on there. Our final plan is basically final, but it's still draft because we wanted to have your input before we put the final stamp on it. So it's very close to being final, pending your final comments. We did a Transit 101 presentation just to make sure people understood what we were talking about when we were discussing transit. And then we developed a transit vision and goals statement. And that was basically informed by the stakeholder committee and the technical advisory committee, our analysis that we did for the existing conditions, all the surveys, and then the advisory committee and public meeting input. So these were the goals we developed. And as we go through the presentation, when we get back to the recommendations, you'll see we pretty much hit all the goals. I'm not going to read them all to you, but basically they're focused on implementable mobility options for the county. So our transit vision development had short-term and long-term outcomes. For the short term, these were the ones we thought we could implement fairly quickly within, say, 1 to 5 years, things that were sort of low-hanging fruit, and then the longer-term ones would take more time to develop because there would be other players involved, the state and federal funding partners, and and then just ongoing looking at things happening within the county. So this goes into our existing conditions report. So one of the important things, and Alana, before the meeting, we were talking about density. So this is one of the key things we look at in our existing conditions is where are the people. So this is a population density map. The darker colors mean it's more dense. The lighter colors means it's more rural or less dense areas. And so you have had some population growth in the county, and future growth of over 40% is projected on out to 2040. So that's a lot of people to plan for, and there's a need to get them around. But also senior growth is expected to increase. Also a key element is employment density, and you can, over there we have on the side, we have the top 10 employers in the county, but we also do an analysis of where those key employers are, and the larger the dot on the map, the larger, at least in number of employees, the circles are. So you can see right around Covington, it's really covered up pretty well, and then it goes more towards the west, and then there is some big development out towards Social Circle. This one I always think is pretty interesting. It's the travel trends summary. So one of our subs, Kinetics Transportation Group, utilized AirSage data, which is basically as you drive along, you're pinging on cell towers, and it's anonymous, but it does track where the cell phones are going. And so they look at that data, and they looked at October 2019, but also compared it to October 2020 to try to get at least look at some of what the impacts of the COVID pandemic were. And we looked at total trips, which you're seeing here, then also more commuter-based trips. But of the trips in the county, about 2/3 stay within the county, and about 1/3 go outside the county. Almost 80% of the trips either originate in Covington or terminate in Covington. So there's a lot of activity, which you can see tonight right outside, right out in this area. So any questions on this list? It's kind of an interesting slide. Oh, so the ones that go out of the county, most go to Rockdale, which kind of makes sense. And then our two other bordering counties have 6% and 2%, respectively. So of the commuting folks, so about 1/3 of them either begin or end outside the county. And a lot of them go downtown Atlanta. or sort of the Atlanta metro area. And you can see the numbers there off to the left. So the major destinations are downtown, midtown, Perimeter and Sandy Springs, but also mostly Rockdale and Walton counties as well. And there is some commuting down to, I guess, job opportunities at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. So the local trips, as you can imagine, a lot of it's centered right around this part of the county that we're in right now. So the top 5 were from Covington, or from West Newton to Covington, and then back to West Newton, Southeast Covington to downtown, and then Southeast Covington to downtown, and Northeast to downtown Covington. So we took that existing conditions data and tried to develop the needs or the gaps in transportation services that transit might be able to fill. And this was part of our Transit 101. This is examples of the different types of transit vehicles. One thing that came up in some of our public meetings was, people didn't want to see big giant buses driving down the street. And really, most of our recommendations don't call for large vehicles. It's more like the demand response vehicle you see there in the middle. But when people think of transit, usually they think of fixed route transit or a train. And the fixed route is typically large buses, 40-foot buses. So that's one type of transit mode. Demand response are usually smaller. We call them cutaway vans. They're like a small airport rental car shuttle type of van. And then not too far from the county is the express service that operates in Conyers, and that's the big coach, over-the-road coach buses that they operate. And then other potential modes, one that's taken the concept of demand response, which is basically when you call in, make a reservation the day before, which is something most counties have. And then they schedule you and come pick you up and take you to your dialysis or your job or whatever. Microtransit is utilizing more modern technology, and it's more responsive. It typically operates in a zone, and then you could have an app and you just sort of call it, like similar to Uber and Lyft, maybe not quite as responsive because you may not have quite as many vehicles, but it operates more real time than demand response service. Van pools are also another type of transit that's typically done in partnership with companies, large employers, to get people to van pool and go to work together instead of everybody driving separately. We did a peer review. We looked at other counties that have transit service that are of similar size and makeup to Newton County. The one we thought was closest was probably Bartow County, and they have about 10 vehicles that operate within the county. There's another example to the south of us, the Three Rivers system. That's a group of counties that have banded together and provide transit service throughout the member counties. Also to the south of us in Valdosta, they have a innovative microtransit service that they've just started within the city of Valdosta. But the counties that were peers were Bartow, Douglas, Hall, Henry, Paulding, and then the two other ones I mentioned, the Lowndes, Valdosta, and Three Rivers. So the findings were they were mostly demand response service, which is just the classic, basic transit service that gets people to essential services, and that's sort of the ubiquitous one in Georgia. So fares range, up to like $4. Paulding County does it free, and then the fixed route services range from $1 to $2.50. Van pool's a little more expensive, $3 to $6. So. Interestingly, so the operating budgets range from 1.4 million annually to 2.7 million, and Bartow's at the lower end of that with their 10 vehicles at 1.5 million. And then they get a mix of local, state, and federal funding for that. So in our transit needs assessment, we also looked at we took all that existing conditions data and put it together in a composite to see where the areas were that might be most supportive of transit, and looked at like key activity generators, where the transit dependent communities were, underlying some of that, or maybe households that just have one vehicle or no vehicles. And so these darker sort of purple, pinkish colored areas are the ones that really need, we think is the better transit markets. And they also correlate to travel patterns throughout the county. So this one sort of shades in the areas a little better. So the really most dense area of the county, which you can imagine is where we're standing right now in Covington. The rest of the areas, the ones to the west and a little south of I-20, are fairly more dense, but not really an urban density. So these would be areas that you might have a microtransit or a flex sort of on-demand type of service. And then in the more rural parts of far northern and southern Newton County and out to the east, you would have more of the traditional demand response transit. Whoops, what did I do? Did I break it? Okay. So we took all that information and we started coming up with some proposed services, and we did them for the short term, midterm, and long term, basically because some are easier to implement and would serve more people in the beginning, and some might take more time either due to coordination with other planning partners or just maybe that service hasn't, the population hasn't developed yet enough to support that service, but long term we see that happening. So we determined what we thought the potential riderships were, cost estimates, and then we also took what the public and stakeholders told us they wanted to see. So the next three slides are the short-term services, and the bread and butter basic one is the countywide demand response, where you do call typically 24 hours in advance. It would be available throughout the county. Based on the peer review, we thought about $2.50 per trip would be reasonable. And these vehicles are also equipped to handle paratransit type services for wheelchaired or disabled customers, and we said it would operate 12 hours a day on the weekdays. The other one, we heard a lot of people that wanted to go from Covington to the shopping areas and dining areas in Conyers. So we came up with a shuttle that would leave from downtown Covington, go to Conyers along I-20. It'd be a fixed route service, so it would just go back and forth between those two areas. It'd be a smaller van or cutaway type vehicle. It would go every 30 minutes. Be about $3.50 per trip. And since most of those areas don't, or most of those services or businesses don't open till 10, we said it'd be from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. so people could go and have dinner and still be able to get back. There was also a desire to go and meet the express bus service in Conyers. So this would be a shuttle that would go from downtown Covington to the East Conyers park and ride lot, and that's where the express service operates to, from that area down to Midtown and downtown Atlanta. This would also be a smaller vehicle. We put 15-minute frequency here, but basically we would be trying to match the frequency of the express buses so that, you know, people could get there and catch the bus, and they leave about every 15 minutes or so from that park and ride lot currently. We proposed that this would be free to promote commutes and get cars off the road, and then like I said, the morning, this would operate just in the mornings and the afternoons like the express service does. There's no midday service. So just the key peak periods. So that's the first, that's the short-term ones. The midterm ones would be to work with the ATL, which is the overarching transit entity in Atlanta, to work on extending the express bus service out to Covington. And that's one of the reasons it's midterm. This would take some coordination and working with that entity to set up this route extension. So, you know, it might take a little time. So that we thought it'd be 6 to 10 years out. The vehicles that they use are motor coach buses. They're very nice, and they have Wi-Fi on board, so you can do work as you're traveling into the city. And their fares range up to $4 right now. It may go up, but $4 and about $7 round trip. The on-demand service, so this would be within the more dense zones, and we've shaded that in on the map. So if your trip's originating and terminating within the zone, then you could call the service. They would come pick you up and take you to your destination and bring you back. We thought it'd be the fare would be about $2.50 per trip. And the frequency would vary upon demand and how many vehicles there were available. And it would operate from 6 in the morning till 9 at night. And then since this is the densest area, downtown Covington, we thought it could justify fixed route service. So there would be a trolley similar to the one you see up there, sort of a classic style looking rubber-tired trolley. And it would go basically like do a rectangular route around the downtown area. And in order to promote the downtown businesses, it would be free, and you know, people could jump on and off as they wanted to from 8 in the morning till 8 in the afternoon or 8 in the evening. Oh, it would also operate, did I go back, in both directions. So if you caught it at noon, you wouldn't, and went off at 3, you wouldn't have to go all the way back around. You could go back the other way. So, all right, micros, there we go. All right, and then longer term, we see potentially down the road a need for more traditional fixed route transit, and that would be one route that would go up to the northeast to hit sort of some key destinations, General Mills, Home Depot, Walmart Supercenter, the airport. So this could serve a number of different key activity centers, and would operate from 7 in the morning till 7 in the evening. And then also one that goes sort of southwest to Porterdale, and it would be a similar thing, hit key activity centers within Porterdale. All right. Any questions up to this point? We're about to get into the nitty-gritty. Yes, ma'am. Okay, well, you can stop me if you. Okay. All right. All right. You can just pepper me at the end. So, all right. So this is a fierce looking slide here. There's a lot on it, but basically your transit services are funded through a lot of different little buckets of little funding pots. So some funding addresses your capital costs for your buses, any sort of infrastructure you have, a park and ride lot, maybe a maintenance facility. Those are all capital costs. And then the operating costs are your staffing, the fuel, the operating the vehicles. The key funding that's available, and there's others, but these are the bulk of where your funding would come from, is urban funding. So that's it's called Section 5307 from the Federal Transit Administration, and it'd be up to 50% or 75% of your operating costs. They would pay also up to 80% potentially of your capital costs. And so the entity that receives that funding is the ATL, and then they distribute it out to the various members of the ATL that have transit. So in fiscal year 2021, you were apportioned money, but since you didn't have don't have transit services, that goes back into the pot, but your apportionment was about $300,000. And then for the Section 5311, which is the rural service, that's up to 50% of your operating costs and 80% that they'll pay towards that. That designated recipient is the Georgia Department of Transportation. They do the rural service and then about six-ish or so small urban systems like Macon, Columbus, Albany. And the state provides a 10% match for capital projects like vehicles. So the average subrecipient in the rural area formula funds got around $300,000, just a little over, in 2021. Section 5339, sub A there, that's your bus and bus facilities. That's a lot of capital equipment, and they would pay up to about 80% of that, and that comes through the ATL. And then the county would contribute the local match, and there's other federal programs that ask for a local match, and transit's the same way. So your cost assumptions were that you'd be using the 5307 urban funding source based on your 2019 to 2021 allocations, and the 5311. We also did a couple of different scenarios with the costing, and the difference was the number of hours a day the service would operate. So the high service is more expensive, and it's operating more hours in the day, and then we did a lower cost one, which was obviously reduced hours in the day. And then these are where the different revenues came from for the different trips or the different mode types and the trip cost per trip that we talked about earlier. So the startup costs would be around $750,000, and so that was the bulk of that is your initial capital purchases, which would be 10 vehicles. And a lot of this detail is in the report. We're just giving you the high level numbers, but we did breakouts per route of how many vehicles we thought each service would need. And so that would be 10 to get started with those first 3 services. It's kind of getting up with all the office equipment and the amenities. We recommended, or we suggest that there would be somebody responsible for this, so you need an administrative position. We put in a cost of $40,000 for that, just for a conversation starter, but it seems reasonable for that kind of service, and the local share of that $750,000 would be almost $200,000. So you'd be basically $550,000 would come from the other funding sources, and about $200,000 would come from you. Right. Yeah, almost 200. And then, so the cost for the short-term services, the high cost was about $8 million, and the low cost was $5 million. and that's the demand response, the dial ride, the shuttle, and the express parking shuttle. Just wanting you to do something to it later. There we go. And so the local share on the high side would be almost 400,000. So it's about half of the total cost. And on the low scenario, it'd be about $2 million. So for the midterm costs, this would be the demand response, Conyers Shuttle, adding in the microtransit, downtown, all that would be about 12 million high and 8 million low, and then the local share would be 7 million and about 4 million. So roughly half-ish. And then long-term, for all you see up there, it's 23.5 million high and about 15.5 million for the low. And then you're 13, almost 14 million for the local share for the high, and about 7.5 million for the low. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question, I'm sorry to interrupt you. So
No, please.
This short, mid, and long-term scenarios, is the costs associated with that are for the 6-year periods, is that correct?
It's for, the FY 34 through 40.
And that's adjusted for the 4% inflation, that was included in the?
Correct.
Per year from now until this time?
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Did I answer that right? So these are the capital costs. So in order to get started, you would have initial purchasing of vehicles. We put out a horizon year of 2023, and that would be for the countywide demand response service, the Conyers Shuttle, and the Park and Ride Shuttle. And that's where the 750,000 came from. And then in 2028, you would need to purchase the vehicles for the midterm services, the Circulator and the microtransit. So that's where those numbers came from. And then, especially for the cutaway vehicles, about every 6 or 8 years, you need to replace those. So you would start a replacement of the initial vehicles you purchased for the demand response and the Conyers Shuttle. And then you've got the longer-term service vehicles purchase for the Northeast and Porterdale routes. And then you start replacing the midterm vehicles. So over that span of time, the total capital cost would be just over $2 million. And then the local share would be about $340,000. So they're a lot more, it's a lot more generous on, excuse me, on the capital side. And that, excuse me, that would be a combination of the urban and the rural pots of money, 53. Okay,
I saw the hours of operation for the in-town was 6 a.m. to 6 p.m.
correct.
Great hours, but my concern was some of the seniors want to attend meetings or events that are after 6. So how would we schedule that, or can we make that, well, your suggestion?
Yeah, that was just a
later?
suggestion. If you really think there's a need to extend the service, then that's
Okay.
at your discretion.
Now, is there an option for a monthly pass versus paying per rate, charging a monthly fee?
Absolutely, yes. And that's a little more fine-grained than what this study was designed to, to report to you. But a lot of the transit agencies do have, student passes, elderly passes, and then, a monthly pass. And it's getting a lot more electronic. It used to be you put coin in the slot or the token. Now it's all on your phone. So it's, you can really do a lot of different things with the fare structure.
And my last one suggestion is for special events, like we just had the 4th of July event here, it was packed. People couldn't get downtown because of no parking. So the transit having it for special hours and extended hours, probably to the midnight or whatever, that would be a good idea to also.
Yeah, and that's something MARTA does a lot of with their trains. But yeah, that's something if you had a transit service that you could modify it for different events. That's true.
Are there any more questions?
As long as you had the budget, I mean, you got to budget all that in, which but it's definitely possible.
County Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I just wanted to bring up some observations regarding transit. I think the initial cost might be underestimated. From my past experience working with an organization, county, that had transit, there are a lot of challenges that with the transit as far as the ridership perception, need, and then the cost. You mentioned about the cost of a admin managing transit. That role would be more of a director's role to oversee transit because it would be a huge undertaking for the county. So that cost would definitely exceed $40,000. Also, I didn't know if you mentioned about for the drivers, if we're going to purchase 10 vehicles, will we have in-house drivers or will we have a contractual agreement with the company that will manage that? Those things, as far as the county, we would have to be looking into because from my experience, transit ended up being a huge cost for the county that they underestimated it because they think they're going to have so many riders that will help with the cost, and that just doesn't take place.
Okay. That's noted, yeah. And so we thought the closest peer was Bartow County, at least for your initial services implementation. Their budget's around $1.5 million. They do have a director, so it might be a little more expensive than $40,000. But we put that in there just to have some sort of talking point or some starting point on considering a salary for someone to take that on. But you're right, there are different ways you can handle implementing a transit service. There's some companies out there that's all they do is just run a transit operation for you, and they can provide the vehicles, the drivers, everything, but there's a premium to that, or you can do it all in-house and have your own hire your own operators and your own vehicles. And that's something like an implementation plan would flesh out for you. But
And it would be more than what's listed. If we hire the drivers, we got insurance, we got salaries, a lot of other things that would need to be taken into consideration.
Right. And those operating costs were taken from the peers that are actually operating the service, but it's like anything. It's our best guess estimate based on real world peer groups. So, but that's something to keep in consideration is the cost, and especially what's happened in the last 6 months,
Any more questions? Okay,
Yes, sir.
Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I was looking at the upfront funding costs. And of course, a county of our size, we're beginning to see where our unemployed, our underemployed, our seniors, our youth who don't have driver's license yet and are able to drive are having those mobility challenges. And so when you look at implementing something such as this, a transit plan, implementing it, in your knowledge, from what you've seen in the past historically, or working with other counties when they've gotten started, how did they generally fund that initial implementation? Was it something that they had to say, okay, well, we got to look at our revenue budget that we are already generating from our property taxes and our fees? Do we try to figure out a way to budget the upfront initial cost out of that budget? Or are there other areas of revenue that we would be able to pull from? For example, I know you mentioned on here something about the Section 5311, Section 5339, are those funding sources that we can actually potentially get funds where we can start off with the implementation, and maybe even if we were to implement it, continue getting those funds to help fund this area of service.
Right. And so typically what the county would be responsible for is a local match.
Okay.
And so that can come, typically counties don't like it to come out of the general fund, but some do it that way. They just budget that in. Some work it into the T-SPLOS. They'll have a quarter-cent, half-cent dedicated to transit service, and that's probably the most typical way that it's done, is through a T-SPLOS.
That was my only question. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I just want to chime in. I think we got about 11 more minutes, something like that, before our next meeting. I think there's always a concern whether it's trails or the transit system. This is about the possibility of crime coming from another county and it's typically, they speak in terms of Atlanta. So I think that similar to is what we did with the trails, is that we had a plan that was set up by the sheriff department if it's in the unincorporated, if it's in the cities, then by the city police department as far as how they may would address or look at before it even started. Because I'm the type of person, I think, as most of us commissioners are, we like to be in front of the curve rather than be behind the curve. And so I think we'll look at maybe a plan, sit down with the officer sheriff, look at a good plan as far as safety, and then we will, our county manager will come back to us with recommendation of what direction you feel like and give us suggestions as far as what direction you like to see us go.
Right, yeah, because that you would need to coordinate with a lot of
Absolutely.
other county services, and typically a big part of implementing a transit service is also marketing and making sure people are aware of the services out there. But part of that outreach can also be about safety and
Absolutely.
So and really what we're at least initially recommending is pretty low impact transit. It's not bringing train loads of people. It's smaller numbers, smaller vehicles. You would have, I think, more control over a countywide transit service than maybe a big metropolitan service. And I think a lot of the crime sort of aspect of it is a little more exaggerated than maybe what's actually true as far as crime around transit. So it's just a perception that's maybe not.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I'd just rather be on
But you're right,
At least try and be on the
it
safe
would
side,
involve
wouldn't be
a
on
lot
the,
of.
wrong side of it. And this time I'd like to, Commissioner Edwards.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry I wasn't more visible, more visible earlier. Question, so even with the section 5307, 5311, and 5339, and/or all those, right? So in your experience, in terms of operating cost, what percentage of the counties that you're aware of would operate in the black in terms of operating cost only?
So there's not, it's typically not a money maker. It's something that is, you know, I've heard it described.
Break even then?
Yeah, they break even as far as their budget goes, but they don't make money off transit. So it's subsidized with the federal pots of money and the local match, like infrastructure is, or other things don't make money. It's just whatever you budget for those services, and then they live within that budget.
Okay, so I guess a more specific question will be, so the fares that are mentioned here, or any fares in your experience in any county, are they supporting, along with the federal money, are they supporting these transit authorities or transit systems without county subsidy other than the matches? I mean,
No, so fare box recovery can range from 20 to 30% of the local match. So you do get that money back. But it also costs you money to collect the fare. Some places think it's better just to go fare free rather than paying for, the cash collection and all the processes that, especially on a smaller system, all the processes you need to keep track of the money. But yeah, typically the fares don't cover all of the cost. It's more, your local match is coming from another source. So it's a T-SPLOST,
but there
sales tax.
there is a line item in the county's budget going forward pretty much forever.
Correct.
Thank you, Mr.
Right.
Chairman.
Yeah, maybe not out of the general fund, but you do have to have a budget item for it.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
County Manager.
Yes, sir, and I just want to emphasize, being that we don't have a T-SPLOST, it would be coming out of the general funds.
Yeah, some have sales tax, some tax other, I don't think rental car would be a big one here, but some places put a tax on rental car, so hotel tax. If it's, transit would really service a hotel district, so there's other sources, but typically it's general fund or some kind of tax, T-SPLOST or something. Excellent questions. They're very thoughtful.
Are there any more questions? I'd like someone to make a motion so we can adjourn and get ready for our 7 o'clock meeting.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you. All right. Yeah.